It's been a while, guys, and time for a new video. So, one of the main problems of all white guys who play open Sicilians and play against Sicilians is, of course, Najdorf system. And today, I just decided to show you a brand new system that young Pragnanda used in Vaikanze this 2014. He played against Wei Yi. It's extremely aggressive, full of sacrifices all over the board, but not only by white, also by black as well. So I'm about to show you a very interesting line, a line that became very popular, especially in 2024, since the beginning, January 2024. And ever since that game that young Prag used it, it became a very hot topic, on IM and GM level. Let's go. Hopefully you're gonna like it and you're gonna have pretty good results with it. First of all, let me just show you how does it begin. Of course, when white plays e4, c5, and after you see like c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes, knight f6, knight c3, and a6. Neither defense for many years, actually, I can say decades, it's been one of the main responses in Sicilians by black, but serious responses by black, and it certainly gave the biggest headache to white players throughout all these years. Because of that, I just have to explain you what do we have to do and how do we have to play against this line. So there are so many variations, but for today I just decided to teach you the bishop g5. When you play bishop g5, I remember when I was young and when I started to play chess, bishop g5 was absolutely the sharpest variation. At the same time, it was like full of theory, and you always had problems how to play these lines because now you all of a sudden have to learn so much theory, and it's not easy. Anyways, after bishop g5, they have two moves. Classic 1 e6 that you're gonna get, percentually speaking, in 80% of your games e6, and in 20% lately more and more popular knight bd7. Let's first take a look how should you play against knight bd7. Knight bd7 has one good point. They just get like a flexible position of the knights, and since we came with the bishop on g5, we didn't only come to take on f6 and spoil the pawn structure, but we also want to go with the queen d2 and long castle. That was like, let's just say, theoretically speaking, and in general, that's the main idea. Well, it's not like that. In many of these Najdorf lines, you definitely want to play the long castle, but in many of these lines, you play actually f4 and put your queen on f3. And that's been, traditionally speaking, one of the main approaches by white for all these years. Although, in this video, I just want to show you what happens when you play with bishop g5 and queen e2, what young Pratt did it. And as you know, lately, these top GMs just try to find something and to dig up something that hasn't been that popular, like so far, and try to, work on it very thoroughly and to apply in their games. And that's going to be the subject of this lesson. Anyways, after knight bd7, you can take on f6. And the very first question is, should we play here queen on e2? Of course not. So here, my suggestion and my vote goes to bishop c4 line. And in this variation, I want to show you like a very interesting approach. This is a very aggressive approach. It's nice to place your bishop there. The thing is, if they ever go with e6, you should be going with that queen on e2. It looks like a new variation that young Prag used it against Wei Yi, but at the same time, it in some ways, just with the bishop on e3, it looks like Velimirovic attack. Here the bishop is on g5, which in some variations and in some moments can be even of great asset for you. So after queen e2, if they ever go h6, since they have, first of all, flexibility with e6 and the queen can take, and especially because they have these two knights, you never consider taking on f6. You play bishop h4, b5, bishop b3, and bishop b7. You always wait, like in Najdorf Sazin variations, that they move the light square bishop, so at some point you can eye on e6. Anyways, what I like about this system is the simplicity of white's plans and the way you play it. So you go with the long castle, you're just going with some x-rays against the queen on d8. At the same time, you're just attacking on e6. And on top of all that, if they ever played before, you always can go for traditional knight d5 Fischer sacrifice. But here, I'm just going to give you like absolutely the best line. Knight goes on a4, prevents some knight c5, controls sometimes knight b6, prevents knight b6. And at the same time, you want to go with f4 followed by e5. Here, they definitely have to play g5, bishop g3, knight e4, and it looks like they just won clearly and the healthy pawn on e4. Well, it's absolute nonsense. You just place your rook on h to e1, and now since all your pieces are just targeting that pawn on e6, you're basically fighting against the weak king on e8, and white has a very, very lovely game. I really enjoyed this game, and for example, I played few blitz games in the past and won my games online very easily. After like queen e2, what happens if they don't chase your bishop away and they urgently play b5? Bishop b3 and knight c5. Makes sense. They pressure the pawn on e4 and they go after the bishop on b3, and with a knight on c5, they also defend properly and control that pawn on e6. We might say, it's okay, it's cool, we like it, yep, okay, no problem. We just go long castle, and now let me show you a game that took place on chess.com back to 2019. It's the game between Nepo and Ding. Ding played h6. Actual world champion played h6. Nepo played bishop h4, the guy who lost his match for the world championship title. Bishop b7 and e5. What's so special about e5? Queen is here, knight is here, queen is here, and that is exactly one of the main problems of black in these positions. They're used on our queen that is on f3, and we never can play f4 followed by e5 when the bishop is on b7. There is also another type of things in classic or Rouser Sicilians where your queen is on d2, and you never can push e5. Here the queen is on e2, which basically gives you an amazing attack and pressure along the d file against the queen on d8. Ding played g5, bishop g3, and jumped with the knight on e4. He put all his hopes into this position. Nepo captured, and when Ding played bishop g7, he probably didn't count on d7 intermediary move. After king f8, rook h to e1, queen b6, pressuring the knight on d4, and now boom, check, sacrifice, and here Ding Liren resigned. What a crushing game by Nepo. Just like I told you, this took place on chess.com back to 2019, but a beautiful game which basically shows you like one of the main characteristics of these type of positions. How nicely is the queen placed on e2, and what can you do with that queen being on e2. Anyways, before we carry on with those things with bishop c4 and e6 with the queen on e2, and once again, remember when e6, your queen goes on e2, let's see one of the main positions that goes after queen b6. But before that, just to show you queen a5. Queen a5 is what I did. I was black once against Grandmaster Brenja from Serbia. I played queen a5, I was black, threatened to take on e4. Queen d2 is absolutely the best move. e6, long castles, b5, bring it back, bishop b7, and centralize. That's what I like about this position. So take a look at this. You just play all these very logical moves, and your game looks great and full of tactical possibilities. So let me just show you what happens here. They go rook c8. Time to break it. Boom. e5. And they're collapsing. For example, if you play knight e5, you just sack your rook. You just play knight e6. And you just play bishop f6. Now you're threatening checkmate on d7. And that's how it works in typical Najdorf. If they play d takes e5, saying like, Mayo, what do you want, buddy? I mean, I'm just going to take, and the e-file is not open anymore. Then you first take on f6, then you take by rook, and look at the mobilization of white pieces against the queen on e8. I mean, I don't want to talk about these positions. Even if you're going to die, you're gonna die like a brave soldier here. So basically, at least enjoy your game and, I don't know, sacrifice. And this is especially good line for tactical players. Then, instead of rook c8, let's just say they go knight c5, saying like, hey, I've seen somewhere that knight on c6 defends an c5 defends e6 and goes after the bishop. And then you say, yes, maybe you've seen that, but you forgot about that after bishop f6, he's getting a typical Najdorf and Rouser pawn structure that should be very bad once you play f4 and positional f5. So after a3, for example, to avoid any b4 ideas and stuff like that, they go queen b6, f4 with the idea of f5, c takes b3, h5 to go with bishop h6, king b1, placing the king in safety, bishop h6 to avoid f5 for the time being, queen f2 to make some x-rays and to allow himself f5, and boom. Once again, we go with this favorite thing and favorite idea. You can't take it because of rook c1 and knight c6 and the queen would be hanging. If they lose the bishop pair, if they have to break themselves with e5, I don't want to discuss these positions, then this knight is just so dominating. And this is an email game from 2012. Black resigned. Beautifully played game. Then, instead of rook c8 and knight c5, let's just say they decide to play bishop e7. Well, buddy, all my pieces are placed well in the center. So I should give myself a bit of a freedom here. Boom. Knight f5, going after the bishop and the pawn on g7. When they take your recapture, you just go after the bishop and the king. They go knight e5, and then you play f4, you just take. Now your queen is under threat. You play queen e2, knight b1, and once again we had a chance to see one correspondence game with a bit broken pawn structure, with a bit weak pawns on b4, e4, f7, kind of weak king on c8. I would definitely choose possibility to go knight e2, to go after the pawn on e4, to go with the knight on c4. I would definitely choose here to be white rather than black. So all things considered, hey, by the way, they have the last possibility here, long castles. And if they just play the long castles, you just play a normal game of chess. I don't need to tell you. For example, play a3. A3 would be one of my main moves here to avoid b4, to give myself, and of course, I just want to play some king b1, placing my king in safety, going with f4 and breaking with e5. So I'm here not only to fill you up with all these theoretical lines, ideas. If you want that, ask me. I sell these PGNs and you're gonna get all these analysis in details. But now on these videos, I just have to, present you like the main ideas. And finally, after bishop c4, the most common thing in practice is queen b6. It's a modern approach by black. And here there's a beautiful game between, I like it a lot, between Pretke and Lkwang. Pretke is Serbian top board. I'm very proud of this guy. And I chose his game against Lkwang, Vietnamese strong GM. So after e6, queen d2, he has to play queen d2 in order to keep an eye on and defend the knight on d4. That's one of the reasons of having the queen on b6. So now you cannot play queen e2 because the knight on d4 would be hanging. So after queen d2, bishop e7, long castles, knight c5. And it's a very normal approach, although I just have to tell you one drawback of these positions for black. This queen on b6 not allowing b5. At the same time, they're not allowing us to have the queen on e2, an easier break with e5 in the center. But okay, somehow, when you don't have b5, you don't have like side action and I would say queenside attack by black. So I fairly enjoy these positions for white. Pretke brought a queen back to e1. He now doesn't have the queen on e2, but he's also ready to, for example, support this with f4 and e5 to overprotect the pawn on e4. Lkwang played h6 and g5, and this is I would say, the main characteristic, and it's in typical spirit of neither defense. Complete madness of the board. You don't care about the healthy or unhealthy pawn structures. You don't care about the pawns or pieces. Just both of these sides, they just go all in. So after e5, Pretke jumped with knight on f5, and He enjoyed the bishop pair for the moment. This guy decided to capture, and a takes b3. After rook c8, king b1. I also have to emphasize the importance of this queen on e1 because it always controls that knight on c3 and give it a proper defense. So after like queen c6, h4, breaking the pawns and trying to open the h file, g4, h5, threatening some bishop h4, for example, he did bishop h4 and stop. Let's take a look at this position. Positionally speaking, this is technically winning for white because position is fairly closed. His bishop is fairly bad. Your knight is doing great. And on top of all that, his pawns are broken all over the board. But I mainly have to insist on the fact that the queen's on the board. So we have some type of possible even attack on the king side. But more importantly, we just can settle this knight either on d5 or on e4. He played queen e4 to defend on c2, to go knight d5, but at the same time offering him clearly winning endgame for white. Le Quanglian played rook g8, knight d5, bishop d8, Pretke played check, played c3, hyper solidifying his game, breaking with f4, this one, played rook h2, e1, b4, by the way, keep in mind, you can't play rook takes d5 because of rook takes d5, and after rook takes d5, it's checkmate. So Le Quanglian played rook c8, Pretke played knight e7, and after f takes e7, he now threatens to take on f7. That's exactly what happened in the game, and Le Quanglian resigned. A beautiful, but at the same, a beautiful positional game. And who would say that you can outplay your opponent in positional fashion in these type of lines? And finally, let's go with the main line. Let's go with the most important thing and the most common thing in Najdorf by black. So it's bishop g5, e6. And here, there are like bunch of lines. Queen d2, f4 followed by queen f3, bishop c4, queen f3 immediately, more and more popular queen d3 positions. But here, I just decided to show you this young Pragnanda's idea with the queen on e2. Just like I said, and once again, let me repeat it. Yes, placing the queen on e2, we just want to have the long castle. Once we do the long castle, we're going to be having like a better attack on the d file and against the queen on d8 and break easier in the center with e5. Second thing, we're going to have like way better type of plan with breaking in the center with f4 followed by e5. And that's what we want to do. That's how we want to play in these positions. So after queen e2, they just want to play for so many, options and positions. And let's just take a look at this one. They go queen c1. Queen c1 is nothing that special. I would just make long castle. That's anyways part of my plan. I would just go f4. That's anyways part of my plan. And here, he is not allowing me to break with e5. So what? So I go with a kingside attack g4. Here, it's going to give me sometimes bishop f6 followed by g5. Here, it's going to give me sometimes some e5. Here, it's going to give me sometimes some f5. Most importantly, I can develop my light square bishop on g2 to over-support the pawn on e4 in case he plays b5, bishop b7. So I really enjoy this game for white. Apart from queen c7, there is a line with h6. We always go back, and they go bishop e7. We play long castles, and boom, they take on e4, a classic Najdorf FIDE. All these Najdorf players are familiar with it. And I have so many options. You can play crazy knight e6. I don't want to tell you about all these moves. Just like I said, if you want, you can write me an email. I can sell you a PGN, and you will find all these analysis. I just want to show you that after queen e4, this one and knight f5, queen g5, king b1, queen f5, you take on h4. You have a nice compensation. You want to bring your queen back to f2. At the same time, you want to play g4. Somehow, you have initiative to be happy with. Of course, you can play also bishop d3 in this position, harassing this queen. Then, after queen c7 and h6, let's check a very classic, similar to Polugaevsky variation in Najdorf b5 option. You play long castles, and let's say they go b4. But let's say they just want to play a thing like bishop b7. Bishop b7 would be a very typical type of thing in these positions. You know, when they play like this, you always, without any problems, can go with the move such as, you know, like a3 to prevent b4 and so on. But at the same time, I just have to tell you something. You seem to forget one of the main points of these positions. Then I can play e5, and I'm breaking the knight, queen, and of course, king is just weak in that case. Don't forget, if they simply get lazy, if they simply forget against which line they're fighting against, we're just breaking it in the center with e5, because that queen on e2 opens up the rook, and that rook always goes after the queen. That's why they either play knight bd7. Looks like you can't play e5 anymore. Well, you think so, baby. Boom, knight d5. And I don't want to now bother you with all these analysis. They take, you take, they gotta go queen e7. Otherwise, if bishop e7, they just resign after knight c6. They lose the queen or checkmate. And if queen e7, you just move the queen. Now you threaten some rook e1 followed by f4. You threaten some knight c6 or knight f5. What a lovely position for white. If you're a tactical player, enjoy this. And if queen e5, that's the only move according to the engine. This. I don't want to now bother you with all these analysis, but I just want to tell you that in the end, white is just a little bit better in all these variations. And that's why after b5 long castles, since we know that knight bd7, which is so logical, doesn't work because of knight e5, and since we know that b4 should be met once again by a Fischerian type of move, knight e5, now we're just saying, okay, then any king d7, you just go g3 and harass that king with bishop h3. King is really weak. From another point of view, if they play bishop e7, you just play bishop f6, and take a look at these terrible pawns and this really bad position of the king. And don't forget, I may be down a piece, but I don't care. Nowadays, with all these engines, lost spirit in like this attacking spirit of games, and we're just relying, don't play queen h5 because engine says -1. Who cares? If he's a bad defender, if he's a bad player, if he doesn't know how to defend, if he's just learning these lines by heart, play a game of chess and crush this bastard. So that's how you should play. And finally, if knight bd7, very logical move. So when you play long castle, at some point you wouldn't be able to break it easily. He's getting like flexible knights and kind of closing the d file. You play f4, they move the queen c7. Very logical as well. So it's fighting against e5. By the way, when we played f4, we wanted to push e5, but now he doesn't allow it. So we play long castles and he plays b5. This is the main line. We just play a3, bishop b7. All of a sudden, we see that black simply develops himself in almost ideal fashion, and at the same time creates some threats against the e4 pawn. Well, what are you doing here? You're playing g4, and you want to play bishop g2. You want to play bishop f6 followed by g5. Anyways, after bishop e7, there are so many moves, and I don't want to bother you now. In the file that I'm selling here, I have h4 with the analysis. I'm having bishop f6, g5, and for example this line. This is also considered to be fine for white. And I have the line with bishop h4 that some of these top guys did in the past. I'm showing you a game between Yu Yang-yi and Kramnik from 2023. Just like I said, this line is so hot because everybody in the 2023 and 2024, all these top guys just use it because they all the time want to find something new to surprise their opponents. Anyways, Kramnik played h6, rook g1. And this is extremely important moment. He wants to go with queen a5 and to do a typical dragon exchange sack. Bishop e1, what a nice move of repositioning, overprotecting knight on c3, repositioning the dark square bishop, and on top of all that, giving himself h4 followed by g5. Kramnik played g5, and boom, after h4, rook g8, h takes, f5. I don't want to bother you with this position. I'm just going to say that Yu Yang-yi won this game, and he had a very lovely position after e5, knight b3, overprotected the knight with rook g3, played something else. He wants to double up his pieces, and eventually, being up in exchange, won the game. Don't forget, he played against Kramnik, one of the best. world players. And finally, after bishop e7, you play h4. That h4 move is more like, I do want to attack you, but at the same time, I'd like to avoid some knight e4 tricks at some point. So when they play like h6, I just want to show you a game that took place in, I don't know where, like approximately 20 years ago, and the guy played b5. Usually everybody plays h6 here. If they go with b5, look at the game. He wants b4, he wants bishop b7, going after the central pawn on e4. a3 prevents b4, bishop b7, long castles, threatens e5, and going after the queen. Knight b7, and this is what I like. A new way, a very modern way of developing this rook on h3 and involving and putting it into the game. At the same time, it has fantastic defensive, role, because it now, when he plays rook c8, he's not even threatening rook c3 because there is this baby on h3 that defends the knight on c3. Because Kasparov said against his game against Movsesian, it's not a question, is rook c3 good or not? It's the question of chess culture. You're not supposed to allow that. So after king b1, to allow your opponent to sack the rook for the knight on c3. This guy played f4, h6, and all in. And take a look at this position. Lovely, attacking, and you know what? You don't need any analysis here. You just know these plans, and you just play a game of chess, especially if you like tactics. Kill your opponent. In the game was very practical, nice rook c3, knight e4, brought a rook back on h3, h takes. He was now down 2 pieces for the rook. But take a look at the open h file. I mean, who's gonna hold and play a position like this? The guy sacrificed the piece now. But now white says, okay, but now you're mine. It's hanging. So black was lost, and he resigned a few moves later. He played knight g3, threatening, for example, if you take, he's going to play bishop f4 and try to survive. The guy played queen h7, threatening mate. This one was hanging, and he was completely lost. That's why after h4, they all should go with h6. And here, you can bring the bishop back to d2, but I like to bring it back to e3, where I defend the knight, and I keep the d file open against the queen on d8. So they go b5. If they play e5, which happened in the game of Demchenko in Krasnodar like 20 years ago, Demchenko played like knight f5, won the bishop pair, play long castle, and here just undermine these pawns with f4, enjoys with the bishop pair, and eventually he won the game. Nice game between Demchenko and some other guy. After bishop e3, they gotta go b5. That's the only, I'd say, drawback of the bishop on e3. Now you have like weaker defense of the pawn on e4. And here, a classic approach would be a3, bishop b7, f3, because you need to defend the pawn on e4. And when I play knight b7, long castles, and please, it's a question, and it's a matter of chess culture. Don't let them go with rook c3 and start attacking you, especially if you're an attacker. If you allow this, then quit this game, do something else, and this game is definitely not for you. So just go with queen d2 or queen e1, overprotect, and then go with some urgently g4, move the bishop here or here so you can connect the rooks and break with g5. But that's not a point. After bishop e3 and b5, I want to give you my analysis. My analysis goes with long castles. This rook goes after the queen on d8, and you just want to break with e5 into the center. Very lovely plan, very lovely idea, and you just want to go like this. After they go b4, boom, you play e5. And that's a typical Najdorf game. We all go with this crazy stuff. They take on c3. By the way, I have all the analysis what happens when they take on e5. You just go knight e6 and so on, so on. If they go knight h7, you just go knight e4 and add your pieces into the attack. But just like I said, I don't want to show you all these kinds of things. If you need it, you're just going to get the PGN. And if b takes e3, e takes f6, bishop f6, you just go g4. And after this, play rook g1. You just want to break with g5. After knight c6 capturing, play g5, and I absolutely believe that, yes, we do have like kind of weak king, but we always can defend it with king b1 and bishop c1. They also have, in my question, even in my opinion, even worse and weaker king on e8. But this what makes Najdorf game being so special. It always gives like a pretty good counter chances to black, but at the same time it always gives white a chance to attack the king and to go for these kinds of things. Guys, hopefully you just enjoyed in this lecture. Hopefully you're going to have many nice and pleasant and spectacular wins with the Queen e2 Pregnanda's approach. And subscribe, like, and sometimes even come up with some donations. Have a good day and bye-bye.